Let yourself be guided. Let it open. Start there. This is one of the most quoted lines from Cheryl Strayed's Tiny Beautiful Things, Advice on Love and Life from Dear Sugar. She is the best-selling author of Wild and anonymously wrote an advice column called Dear Sugar, and she compiled her advice and a little bit more into this book as a self-help and advice tool for her readers. It guides readers through the realities of life. It tackles just the few things I talk about: self-image, friendships, and romantic relationships. It does incorporate some of the terms we talk about in our interpersonal communications book in class. Just a few: self-concept, emotional communication, and relationship stages through romantic, friendship, and even family. I will begin by discussing the book's discussion of self-concept, self-awareness, self-esteem. Because she shares such intimate moments from her own life, it makes it an easy, self-guided book. She talks mostly about the reflection and improvement of self. She first talks about the concept of never giving up. Quote, "But I do know that we are here, all of us, to do the best we can, and every last one of us can do better than give up." She talks about self-handicapping strategies and self-concept. Without these two components, you are going to set yourself up for failure. If you allow yourself to have an excuse for failure, then you are self-handicapping, and if you view yourself as a failure and that's your only self-concept, then of course you are going to set yourself up for that failure and you're going to give up. Next, she talks about being open and allowing yourself to feel the world around you. She talks about being transparent in the world and sincere and putting your best self out there. She also talks about, in this, taking responsibility for yourself. Quote, "Nobody's going to do life for you," end quote. Next, she talks about self-esteem and self-concept. This is a big one. She talks about tiny revolutions and how in life, to better ourselves and to become better people, we constantly have these revolutions with ourselves and we're constantly changing. Working on yourself needs to be a priority. That's another thing with self-esteem, and self-concept needs to be a constant job that you are putting as a priority. Second, I'm going to discuss friendship issues that Strayed discusses and tries to solve in her text. First is the ownership of feelings in friendship. These are the I messages and emotional understanding. So taking ownership for your feelings and open and honestly communicating that using I messages, and also emotional understanding, being open to emotional discussions with a friend. Next is a big one: relationship repair. She says, quote, "When bad things happen, often the only way back to wholeness is to take it all apart," end quote. And in that rebuilding needs to be forgiveness and rebuilding of trust. And that is two issues she focused on when it comes to friendship and rebuilding when you have a friendship that is deteriorated. Next is boundaries in friendship. This is the roadmap to friendship. She talks about proper communication of needs and wants. It's really important in a friendship to make sure those are set and also that those are properly communicated. Third, I will discuss how Strayed tackles romantic relationships and the solid advice that she offers for love in your life, mostly marriages, but also many other romantic relationships. She talks about when it comes to love, bettering yourself and strengthening love and acceptance in a relationship or marriage. First, she talks about in order to be in a relationship, you have to be accepting of love. And she talks about how you have to know you're deserving and how you have to have a positive self-voice that says, quote, "It's okay, you are loved," end quote. Next, she talks about complete acceptance of yourself and of your partner. Quote, "I could be every piece of myself and he'd love me still," end quote. She talks about this kind of agape love and the compassionate, the ego, without ego love. She talks about loving and accepting and being open to one another. It's really important when it comes to relationships, but especially marriage, when you're in a long-term relationship. Next is hard times. This is another one that's crucial and hard in long-term relationships. There are going to be hard times. She says to focus on the love that you share and what is shared between the two of you. Quote, "It's composed of two people who feel perfectly right about sharing their lives with each other, even during the hard times," end quote. She talks about the pragma, the return to practicality, and remembering that the practical stage of love, just remembering why you're together, and why you're a good fit, and the companionship that you have in that person, and the comfortability. Now that I've discussed the things that Cheryl discusses, I will talk about the ones that I applied to incorporate into my everyday life and how it worked or didn't. A lot of these are long-term solutions, so I noticed that I want to keep working on them and keep building them, but I'll talk briefly about my success with those. The first, in the self, I incorporated the being open and allowing myself to feel, and self-esteem and self-concept. These were important to me because these are two things I struggle with. I try to allow myself to be more open to those around me and to take responsibility for my own feelings. I also worked on my self-esteem and self-concept. I love the idea of tiny revolutions and taking things that you're not confident in one day at a time and conquering those and making that revolution and moving on to the next one. For friendship, I incorporated an ownership of feelings and forgiveness. Forgiveness is a big one for me. I'm a grudge holder, so I try to always do my best over the past couple of weeks, past month or two, to incorporate forgiveness and own those feelings. Ownership of feelings, iMessages are a big thing for me, taking ownership for my feelings and not placing it on the other person. So instead of saying, like, that makes me angry, I am angry because. That's something I practiced and did very successfully. Forgiveness is something that's a little bit harder, I think, a little bit bigger of a concept and a little bit harder to incorporate into every day. But I'm working on it. Not unsuccessful, but certainly not probably the most successful. Finally, in love and marriage, I incorporated self-voice and used that as a mantra, and that really helped my personal anxieties and issues with acceptance of love. So that, quote, "It's okay, you are loved," I wrote that down on my notebook and my planner every day and repeated that. It worked really well. It helped me boost that feeling. Next, agape love. It's really hard sometimes. You get selfish, you get busy in everyday life, but I try to incorporate that and the compassionate aspect of that and just taking your ego and yourself out of it and just loving your partner to love your partner without ego, compassionately, openly. That's something we're still working on. It's easy to be selfish in every day, but it was good to incorporate and good to take that minute to think about it. In conclusion, this book did open me up to a new way of approaching myself, the friendships that I maintain in my life and my marriage. In Cheryl Strayed's words herself, I allowed myself to be gutted and open. We guided through self-image, friendships and romantic relationships, and the tips she gave and the tips I incorporated. Cheryl Strayed's advice allowed me to approach life different, being more open to not only myself, but those around me. I recommend this as a read to anyone looking for any kind of help in life. Thank you for your time. This was Samantha McKee with my self-improvement presentation.